made me start laughing already. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. I am happy to have with me today Tyler Lessard. He is the founder of Outside In Marketing and just recently the Chief Marketing Officer of Technology Advice. Tyler has over 20 years experience in marketing, audience development, demand generation, brand building, all that good stuff. And we'll probably talk a little bit, that's going to kind of all meld into what we're talking about today. I actually first technically met. We've never actually really met, but we've met when Tyler was working with Vidyard, 10 years working with Vidyard as their VP of marketing. Great product, great online video platform. And you also launched and grew this sales feed media network that has 150,000 followers right now. So that is going to be key to kind of the stuff that we're talking about today. And then also, if you don't have it, the visual sale, Tyler's book. Mine is personally autographed, so someday it might be worth some money for you.
Ooh, I don't even get one of those. You're lucky, Barb.
Yeah. So thank you, Tyler, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
I'm stoked to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And as you said, I now feel like an elder statesman in the world of content, having my 20 plus years of experience in this space. But really, as you mentioned, over the last decade or so, as I spent a lot of time at Vidyard, where I got to really live at this intersection of marketing and tech, of art and science, of video. It was really eye-opening for me, and got to do a lot of really wonderful things. Had a really great team around me. So yeah, excited to share all that I've learned over the last 10 to 20 years, and hopefully answer some questions from our listeners.
Yeah, that's great. So we're just going to dive right in because I think the topic's going to be really great. So we're starting with this idea of brands needing or wanting to act like media brands, and what does it really mean? What does it entail? Kind of basic stuff.
So this has been interesting over the last 10 years since I've been in my life at Vidyard and now Technology Advice. Is we hear a lot of that lingo in the market, a lot of quote unquote thought leaders, a lot of marketing gurus who talk about the need for businesses to think or even act or even become a media company. And as I've been thinking about a lot over the years, and we played a small role in it as Vidyard, as a video tech provider, but it really dawned on me that most of us don't know what that means. Like, what does it mean? How is it different to be a media company from being a B2B marketing team? And for many years, the way I heard a lot of people interpret it, and the way, frankly, for the first while we interpreted it ourselves, was, thinking and acting like a media company is really about taking your content marketing strategy to the next level and writing content that is really geared towards your audience rather than is just all about you. And this is something, frankly, that we all just do today as good hygiene marketers, right? We're writing blog posts, we're writing ebooks about topics our audience cares about, using those to create a following, and then hopefully down line we'll convert them later. So we've all started been doing that. But to me, that's just one small part of it. And I think the real outcome when you start to act and become a media company is that you go all in on this notion of audience first content and media, and building a holistic strategy around that, and saying, how am I going to engage an audience with content that's so resonant that makes them feel something, that they want to subscribe, that they can't wait for the next thing to drop, that they're looking forward to tuning into next week when you share the next thing. And that's what media companies do really, really well, right? If you think about, there's lots of types of media companies, but that's what they do really well. They create a following, they create anticipation, they give you things that make you want to come back and can't wait for that next thing. And that's a difference for marketers from just doing good blog content to creating this highly resonant content that makes people just clamor to come back and see what's next.
Yeah. So here's the question. If you think you want to be like a media site, or a true journalist media site, they have lots of different categories, lots of different areas they go into. It's kind of widespread. And I'm wondering if one of the biggest challenges with companies trying to do that is they're trying to replicate that.
Right.
And that, in a way, is too big for them to replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that can be a challenge when you start to think about this. And if you do take it very literally and you say, okay, here's how media companies traditionally work, I should go do that.
Yeah.
One of the mistakes that people will make is, what are the motivations or goals of a true media company versus what we're trying to do as, say, a B2B business? Now, a true media company is funded by their media, right? Like they're funded by advertising, by subscriptions, by direct payments based on the breadth and quality of the content they're putting out there. And so it is always in their best interest to cover more and more topics, to create a broader and broader audience, and to find more and more streams of direct revenue.
Yeah.
Us as B2B companies, while that direct revenue would be nice, that's not really our goal in building this next generation of a content strategy or really a media strategy. Our goal is to create a audience of what I think of as followers, fans, and future customers, right? People who are in our space that at some point could be potential customers of ours, but likely aren't in the market today.
Yeah.
And so by nature of that, we should have a much more narrow scope on who we're targeting. And we should lean into that and go deep on that and say, we don't need to be everything to everybody. We want to really focus on not this topic, but on this persona. And that's how I think a little bit differently in what a successful media brand as a B2B company can be. It's when you really focus on the persona that you're trying to build a relationship with and go deep on that persona rather than trying to go broad and appeal to lots of different types of people.
Does it also kind of flow into that, the types of assets you're creating? Like, you have blog posts, videos, podcasts, like you can do everything. You can do
Yep.
multiple video series, multiple podcasts.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is, and I was working on an article that I wanted to do an update on what some of the, like what Salesforce did with Salesforce Plus, I think it's
Yep.
called.
That's right.
Terminus had one, Demand Base has one.
Yep.
And I was trying to get an update on what all, and SalesFeed, I think, came out right around the same time as well. And I was trying to get an update on what these people were doing, and nobody wants
Right.
to really talk about it. And it's like, okay, why not? Well, I think Terminus is gone. So
Yeah.
so it's not as simple as just saying you need to do it this way. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of
Yeah.
commitment, and it's a commitment that you don't necessarily see return
Yeah.
for quite a while.
Well, here's something that I've learned. This is a really important takeaway, folks. So listen up to this part. One of the, I think, mistakes, frankly, that some other companies, not naming names, but you reference things like Salesforce Plus, Terminus TV, and I've seen some others. I think one of the mistakes that they've made in trying to launch what they call a media brand is that they assume that a media brand equals video and episodic series, right?
Yeah.
They're using Netflix, HBO, whatever it is, as their model, which there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is, what media companies do really well isn't video series. What media companies do really well is they understand their audience like nobody's business, right? They have extreme hyper empathy for who they're trying to attract, what kind of content they believe is going to highly resonate with that audience. And they invest, like they over invest in delivering on that. They serve their audience. Now, yes, there are media companies like Netflix and HBO who are video first media companies.
Mm-hmm.
There are also lots of media companies who aren't, right? Like The Athletic is a great example of a sports media brand that has built an incredible business around hyper focusing on a specific audience, right? They care about the sports nut, right? Like the person who just wants the inside scoop on all things sports. Their focus is on written content, articles, timely updates, news, and yes, they have some video as well. But when you obsess over the audience, then you start with, how can I best serve this audience? Is it through certain types of content? Is it through different channels, right? How are they most likely to prefer to engage, to consume, and so on? And so by starting with, hey, we're going to build a media company, and that means we're going to do a video streaming service, you're starting with what you want to do as opposed to what your audience really wants from you. which actually is the connection point to the business I've started, which is called outside in marketing, because that previous approach, I think of as inside out, right? You're like, we want to do this because we think it's going to be cool, whether or not our audience wants it, right? But outside in is like that fundamental switch where you say, who am I trying to target? How can I best serve them? What are their preferences and expectations? And I build my content strategy around that. And that's what we did with Sales Feed so well, because we tested a lot of things early on. We interviewed a lot of salespeople, and we found very quickly they don't read blog posts. Frankly, most of them don't read. Sorry, salespeople, but it's true. Long form content just doesn't work with them. They don't want to have to go and find something. They want it to find them. And so all those things like put a big roadblock around having a quote unquote media site where we were releasing lots of articles, or a video series based company with half-hour long episodes, right? We knew immediately that's just not going to work with this audience.
Yeah.
It might if we were targeting somebody else, but we're not. And so we learned very quickly, they preferred short form content. The more visual, the better. They had a over-indexed preference for humor. And I think it's because sales is such a stressful job that like at the end of the day, if you could make them laugh, that's a big deal for them. Yeah. So when we really leaned in and learned about our audience, that formed our content strategy. And we said, this is where we're going to invest. And, it went like this, as opposed to saying, here's what we want to do. Now come follow us.
Yeah. That's what's something that marketing should be doing anyway, right? Really deeply understanding their customer. I think, unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. They still think I'm the brand and I want to do what the brand wants to do. So, are there things that you would tell a company to do specifically to doing a media brand as opposed to just persona development for marketing overall?
Well, I think whether you're doing a media brand or just trying to do marketing, I think you're absolutely right that, most companies will say that they understand their audience. Most companies do research to, sort of form that opinion, create their personas and ICPs. But the reality is it's typically pretty surface level. And what's happened over the last few years is that there have been a lot of new dimensions to how buyers are going to interact with us that we need to better understand and explore as marketers. So for example, a traditional like marketing research process to understand who is our audience, right? I want to develop our ICP and our persona. We'd be looking at things like, okay, what is their typical title, right? Like what are their jobs to be done in the workplace? What challenges do they typically face? Maybe how many kids do they have, right? Like there's these like surface level attributes that are really important to create this sort of persona. But, very rarely do marketers ask a level deeper. What kinds, like as simple as this, what kinds of content formats do these people tend to prefer? And how can I figure that out? Here's a good one. What are their most, as sort of a group, who are the most followed social media accounts, the most listened to podcasts by those individuals, the most frequented third-party media sites? And when you actually, the most subscribed YouTube channels that serve that audience, right? Like these are things that I like I love to know about the community I'm serving, because I can now start to formulate a good understanding of like, well, why is that YouTube channel so popular? Like what's different about it than others? Yeah. And that will start to give me some insights on what that audience craves, right? It might be like, oh, I get it now. This is the one that has an incredible personality, who's somebody who is just like them that they can relate to. And I can pull that out and I can say, if I want to have a best in breed content strategy, I could borrow that idea and say, okay, I need that. And which social channels are the most frequently, followed or engaged with, right? And when we did that when building the Sales Feed media brand, we found that like after Salesforce, whose followers are purely because they're Salesforce, right? It's all their customers. But we found like the next most heavily engaged social media accounts were Sales Humor and Corporate Bro, who were both humor channels. They were creating skits and memes. And so again, immediately we're like, well, why do so many people, like why do every one of their posts get 500 reactions? And you're like, well, my audience clearly loves that. Yeah. And so when we go that level deeper, we start to understand what channels, what formats, what drives them, what creates an emotional response. And now we're creating more of like a 3D persona as opposed to that kind of surface level two dimensions that we used to have. And that's really important for any content strategy, especially a media brand strategy.
Yeah. It's a great message from Matthew. He says, I'd rather a company say, we don't understand our audience, we need your help. That would be refreshing.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what can you do to make sure your brand stands out among, like, because everybody's talking about being a media brand. I don't think everybody's kind of really doing a true media brand, or if they are, they're still challenged with it. Like, what are the things that you would recommend they do to kind of get
Yeah.
after knowing that audience really well and knowing what to do? Where would you go from there?
So I think the biggest thing, the most successful instances of media brands as B2B companies, sort of creating a media brand, which is where I have the most visibility. The most successful examples of those, I've found that all of them over-index on the degree to which they focus on serving their audience, right? It's back to this like audience first, audience centric. You're not talking about you. You're not talking at your audience. You're talking with your audience. And you're focused on how to create highly resonant content and engaging assets across different channels to do that. So number one, and that's easy to say, but the reality is they're investing in it. It's not like, yeah, we're going to do a content strategy and we've got one person who's like writing and doing this and doing that and doing that. It's like, that's okay, but that's not going to get you that far, because that person can't spend as much time as they need to really be a part of that community.
Right.
And so number one is a level of investment and saying, look, we're going to do this seriously as a business. It doesn't mean you have to hire 10 people, or probably not even 5. Right? We built SalesFeed with a team of 3 people, but we had a very big focus there, right? And we were able to create multiple channels, do a lot of research, really serve that audience effectively. So number one is your level of commitment to serving the audience and being genuine about that. I say the second thing, and it's an extension of that, is that you have to have people, and this is really important for a media idea, is having people within your team who can speak as true trusted peers to your community and really drive strong empathy. So when we launched SalesFeed, the first hire I made into my quote unquote content team for SalesFeed was a salesperson. It wasn't a marketer, it was a salesperson. And why was that? It was because I knew that individual understood the persona we were going after, and that they knew all the inside jokes. Right. They understood like what keeps these people up at night, right? Why do they love this so much? Why? And when they put themselves out there, eventually we have to get on camera for most media brands, because video is going to be at least one part of it. They can be out there as a peer to that community, speaking to them in their language, much better than a marketer or a content person could. And so again, in traditional content marketing programs, some companies do that, right? They have like a subject matter expert who represents the audience. Yeah. Maybe you target legal professionals. And so you have like an SME who comes from the legal industry who partners up with your content team to make sure what they're writing, what they're producing makes a lot of sense. Truly serving your audience is like hiring that person in as a full-time creator in your team. And maybe they're the face of the videos, because they can now relate directly to that audience and be that trusted source. So it's those little nuances to like the degree to which we decide we're going to serve that community and invest in it makes all the difference in the world, from whether it just becomes a little bit better of a content program to truly like an audience first media program where people are like, I want to be following you. I can't wait to see what you do next week.
It's kind of, if you've got all these great employees that know this subjects really, really well, you almost want to build it into their kind of employee roles and responsibilities, that they actually become part of this, as opposed to always going outside the company to get that kind of subject matter expertise and face of your company.
I think that can be a huge asset. And, not every business has this, depending on like if you sell to unique verticals or things like that. But most companies, have a representation of their buyer, of their audience within their own, virtual 4 walls.
Yeah.
Again, if you sell to, or you're trying to build an audience of HR leaders because you sell an HR information system, right? Like you as a media brand leader, as a marketer, you should be spending a lot of time with your own HR leader, and you should be inviting them into your little private Slack channels where you're like creating HR memes, and you're like not only are you asking them for feedback, but you're encouraging them like, hey, here's like a new template, see what you can come up with, right? Like make some memes for us. Or, if you like, which TikTok accounts do you follow? And if they're like, I don't follow any, we're like, well, why don't you go on there and snoop around for HR related ones and tell us which ones you think are the best, right? Like those people can be such amazing sources of inspiration, of validation, of feedback. But to your point, they can, in some instances, also become a part of your content engine. They can either, again, provide ideas, input, feedback, or in some cases, if they're the right person, maybe they do actually become a contributing part of that content team.
Yeah.
Again, if they can balance it with their regular jobs. So it is a great starting point if you don't have that luxury of having a full-time person.
Yeah. That's a good segue into, we were talking about this before we went on camera about how do you get yourself psyched up for being on video, for actually kind of doing that kind of stuff. Like I said, I hate it. I actually hate being on video, and I don't know. And you will never see a picture of me in my house, like my kids or my husband, but never me. It's just something I feel. I just hate it. But how can you get a person to kind of get past that and actually just go out there and do it and have
Yeah.
fun?
Well, I mean, Barb, as someone who, at least says they don't like being on camera, you're terrific. And you have a really great, personality, and a really approachable personality, which I love. Right. And, one of the things that I think a lot about for those of us who get on camera, not everybody has to, right? Like
Yeah.
if there's a great subject matter expert in your team and they just aren't cut out for video, sometimes you want to just call it a loss and say, you know what, you're going to be my best writer on my team. You're going to write the scripts, but we're going to find somebody else to be that on-camera personality. And sometimes it's just a reality. But that said, for any of us, the biggest thing I think about when starting to embrace video as a medium to get our message out there, maybe we're creating short content for our social channels, maybe we're doing thought leadership like this and then cutting it down for our YouTube channels. The most important thing for me, when you think about yourself on camera, is number one is like just the perspective that you have, and thinking about, hey, I'm communicating with my audience, with whomever I'm on camera with, as peers. Like we're all friends here. We all want each other to be successful. Let's not go into this feeling like, oh my gosh, they're going to judge me, or like I have to like be the smartest person in the room, because you don't, right? So number one is like really understanding and approaching it as, I'm speaking as a peer to my audience, not as like an expert. Unless you really are an expert, you can go that path. Part of that is I like to think of myself when I go on camera as an explorer rather than an expert.
Yeah.
And I coach a lot of folks who are building these sorts of roles in content teams, especially somebody who's going to be out there drumming up a lot of thought leadership. They often say like, geez, I want to be on social like every day or two, but like that's exhausting. And I've run out of things to talk about. I'm not an expert in all these things. And my guidance is, you don't have to be an expert, but you could be a really great explorer. Like your job is to explore these topics with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that might mean you have a strong opinion, or it might mean that you're more of the facilitator, right? Like much like you're doing here, Barb, right? Like you've got a lot of great answers, but other people do. So you are exploring the idea of like best in class content marketing. And if you go into that again with that mentality, right? Like just that little mental shift of like, I'm not an expert. I'm not talking at my audience. I'm an explorer who's talking with my audience, who's engaging in the community and trying to surface new ideas. That can help a little bit to creating a little bit more of a comfort level. And then the last piece is understanding that we're all different. We all have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to just about everything, and particularly to our communication styles and being on camera. And you can really lean into your own strengths. You don't have to be something that you're not, right? Like you may watch somebody on camera and they're really funny and you're like, I want to be like that. But if that's not your natural place, it's usually not going to go well, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have to be the funny person, or you don't have to be the really creative one or the high energy one like I tend to be for people who know me. You can be the really thoughtful one. You can be the explorer, right? You can think of yourself in lots of different ways and lean into your own strengths. You can be the person who asks really great questions, right? And so these little things really do matter when you think about, who am I going to be on camera? How am I going to do it? And how do I take the pressure off of myself to be something I'm not?
Yeah. No, it's all good. And yeah, I still hate being on video probably till the day.
It's still not everybody, they'll be like, that sounds fine, Tyler. But when the camera turns on, I'm still like, oh, I don't want to be here. And, it's not always going to work for everybody, but Every time you do it, of course, same thing, right? Like you build the muscle. If you can
Yeah.
do it offline as well, like just to build the muscle again, like if every video you're making is like, oh my gosh, this is the most important thing I've ever done, it's tough, right? But if you do a lot of like little micro videos separately, maybe stuff you don't even share anywhere, right? They're for your own little personal folder. Every time you do it, it does build the muscle a little bit. It makes it a little bit easier. You get a little bit more comfortable. So there's another tip for you.
All right. Okay. So one of the reasons I think a lot of brands won't do this is because they don't see immediate value
Yeah.
or kind of revenue return and stuff. And so there's two questions I have to go with that. First of all, you did a LinkedIn post this morning.
I
That
did.
was great. that talked about if you like this, then you like that, then you'll love that, as a way to kind of create the flow of information. And I think that and you can explain what that is for the audience, but I think part of that helps a company understand how to do it the right way and why it makes sense to do it.
Yeah, this is so important. I know I've said that a couple times here, folks, but this one is even more important. So listen up. There's a few reasons that companies fail at investing in what you'd call like a media strategy or a media brand. And one is, again, is sort of the wrong strategic direction to start, right? They don't really take an audience first approach. Number two, which we touched on a little bit, is they don't invest in the right talent to make it a reality. They sort of kind of try to evolve their existing content program as opposed to rethinking what we need in the team. And then the third, which is a really, really important piece, is that they aren't intentional enough in thinking about the conversion paths that they're going to create for the audience they're going to build. So, because again, if you think about a traditional B2C media company, their goal is just straight revenue. The more eyeballs on their pages, the more money they make. So everything they do and invest in is to get more eyeballs. As a B2B company, we're using a media brand to build an audience with the goal of eventually converting those people into customers. That's where we make our money. So we have to be intentional in what that connective tissue is, from the media brand strategy, the audience building, the stuff we're doing to build that audience, but at the same time, making sure we know how is that going to move them down the path. And so when I think about this, the kind of model I landed on, which you mentioned I shared in a LinkedIn post this morning, is I think about a content strategy that goes like this. It starts with if you like this content, and that's what I consider is most of what we create, frankly. It is the ungated, freely available content that we would put out across our social channels, our YouTube channel, our website, whatever it happens to be, right? This is the stuff anybody can engage with that we're putting out there to grow our reach. And we're going to focus on making that content really great so that people want to continue to engage with us. But I call it the if you like this content because as it goes, I think about if you like this stuff we're putting out to everybody, the next part is you'll love this. And the you'll love this content is the stuff that is now gated or has some kind of subscription behind it, where you now have to take a bit of a bigger step to commit to a bit of a relationship with us, right? And so the you'll love this is going to be things like our, the most incredible newsletter for your industry, right? Like the sales feed newsletter. It's like the number one newsletter for salespeople. Or it is our YouTube channel, right? Like you're not going to want to miss our weekly videos. So make sure you smash that subscribe button. Or it's our podcast, right? If you like this, you're going to love our podcast and blah, 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 blah. And so those, or it might be some reports. It might be a set of guides, right? Like a sales feed, you'll love this content was our newsletter, our YouTube channel, our podcast. And then we had a series of sales guides that took like the best tips of what we shared and packaged them into some really robust cheat sheets and things like that. So that content is intentionally meant to help us identify who's out there and to get them to subscribe to something that over time we now have a way to sort of engage them and nurture them. So now that is typically where we create the conversion points down to, the final point, which is now if you love this stuff and you're engaging with it on a weekly basis, you might at some point need this. And that's that third tier, which is now weaving in those product awareness bits, those product offers into those. So for example, if somebody's following you on your social channels, right, your next step might be, if you love our content here, Or if you like our content here, you'll love our weekly newsletter, where we bring you the best from what we post on social, plus all these other good things. Beautiful. So now you have a conversion point where they're signing up for your newsletter. Now, in your newsletter, maybe every 3 weeks or so, you're going to be including an article from your own company blog that talks about stuff related to your business. Or maybe you've launched a new product and you're going to shamelessly drop it into that newsletter and say, guess what, folks? We just dropped something amazingly cool. You might love it. Go here to check it out. And because you've already built that trust, because they're engaging in an ongoing basis, they're now going to be more likely to click that and convert down to try that new product, to sign up for that webinar, to download that new content asset that is more about you than about them.
So
and
it's okay to do that, right? You can separate. It's okay. Sorry. It's okay to talk about your product as part of this process. Like, as long as it's not kind of blatant in your face right from the beginning, pushing product.
It absolutely is. And you have to find that right balance, though, of, again, what you're trying to accomplish and understanding sort of how your audience is going to, react and engage with those sorts of things. There's no perfect science to it, of course, right? Like, we could be talking about our products every day on our social channels in addition to other things. But the reality is, for people who are, kind of joining along for the conversation, who aren't yet ready to buy what you offer, they might get alienated by that, right? It might be, like they're going to be like, oh, okay, I'm out, right? They're like, I'm out. Here's a really good example of, how I think about it. That is a really small change people can make to the way they do ongoing engagement that can have a big impact. So, for all the marketers listening, really common example, you get a bunch of new leads in from, they downloaded your white paper or they attended a webinar. They're fairly high level, top of funnel leads. And traditionally we take those leads and we now put them into it's the nurture word. We put them into a nurture stream. I don't know about you, Barb, but it's been a while since I woke up in the morning, looked at my phone and said, oh, I got another nurture email from this company. I'm so excited to read it, right?
I know.
Hasn't happened. So we take these amazing leads that we've gathered, we put them into a nurture stream that's focused on converting them to our product over a short period of time. Well, guess what? If they didn't engage in the first one, they're probably not going to engage in the second one. And the reality is, it's not because your nurture isn't good. It's because they aren't in the market to buy what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. But the problem is, if you just put them in that nurture stream, by the third email, they're like, I'm out. I'm ignoring you from now on. I don't care about what you have. I don't need it right now. 6 months later, when they actually have a need, they've forgotten about you. And you blew that lead away. So what if instead of the nurture program, you put them on your amazing, incredible weekly or bi-weekly or monthly newsletter that shared the best tips, the coolest ideas, the funniest memes, and the best YouTube videos from across your community from that week, 2 weeks, or month? Do you think those people would keep opening that every month to see what's there? Way more likely. Now, the key there, though, is, so now you're creating that ongoing engagement. But now you also have this opportunity to weave in the awareness building, right? So it's okay that that newsletter includes a like, hey, and by the way, we've got this great new product that can do this. If you're interested, let us know, right? Because now people will be like, nope, I'm not interested, but I'm still interested in the meme. So I'm going to open next month's or next week's. And eventually, though, if they do have a need, then they're going to be like, oh yeah, I do need this right now. Let's talk. So you're creating that ongoing engagement with your audience. You're seeding in some of those awareness building pieces of your product. And you're giving them an opportunity to raise their hand when they're ready. And that's the difference between talking about your products and services in a media strategy as opposed to in traditional marketing land. In the media strategy, you're creating opportunities, infrequent opportunities for them to raise their hand. In the old marketing world, we're forcing them to a yes or no decision. And if they're no, then they're gone, right? So it's a little bit of that mindset shift to like when and how we integrate our products into our content, but have that mentality of them putting it here to give them an opportunity to raise their hand, not as a way to try to shove my message down their throat.
Why is it so hard for companies or marketers to get past that nurture series?
Because we are thinking about our current quarter's goals all the time, right? And we're like, look, if this person isn't in market for what we have today, so then like forget them, right? Like I have no need for them this quarter. because we are so focused on converting in market leads, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? They're the lowest hanging fruit, and we have tight budgets. We're trying to be as efficient as possible. So we're always focused on like this quarter's performance. And so we take that shot and we say, if I've got 100 people and I put them all into this nurture with like, if I can convert one of them and alienate 50, that's okay because that's going to help me hit my this quarter's pipeline. But what if I didn't convert any of them, but didn't alienate any of them either? And next quarter I converted 2, and the quarter after that I converted 4, and the quarter after that I converted 6. But that you're betting on a long-term strategy, and it's hard for companies to do that. And we just haven't done it that way before, right? Like it's a new muscle. Like I'm sure most people listening are probably like, yeah, we haven't done it that way before. And so it's the fear of the unknown, and you don't know if it's going to work, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you it's going to work for you. So there's a little bit of that too. And you have to take a leap of faith to test it.
How long do you think you need to, how long would you test it before you knew, okay, this is just not working for us, or we're doing it wrong and we need to rethink it?
Yeah. So I think you need these sort of like staged approaches to testing out the success of the metrics sort of as you move down funnel, if you will. And so what I mean by that is, realistically, like for most companies anyway, the like real like pipeline generation metrics are going to be longer term, right? It could be 6 months, could be 12 months, depending on how long your deal cycles are, could be longer. But what you want to do is you want to be intentional about, okay, for the first, 3 to 6 months, we're going to be focused on those like quote unquote, like top of the funnel metrics. Like, are we seeing our audience, number one, is reach growing? Are we seeing more and more people follow or subscribe? Number two, are we seeing, this is the second one I like to look at, is engagement levels, right? So are we seeing high and increasing engagement month over month? Those are two really important leading indicators, right? If we're growing our reach and we're growing our engagement, those are positive leading indicators to future conversion, right? If we're growing our reach, but our engagement's going down, that's a problem because it means people are like following, but they're dropping off. And so the strategy isn't going to work. So instead of now saying, oh, we got to look at the pipeline numbers, I'm like, you know what? Let's fix engagement first. Like the content's not resonating. So let's try some other things. Once we get the reach growth working, the engagement growth working, then you're like really start to hone in on, okay, are the people who are subscribing to the newsletter, downloading the reports and so on, are they converting into business? So you have to take a bit of a stage approach to thinking about what metrics do I care about at what time. And often it'll take a good 6 months at least to figure out the engagement piece, and probably 12 months to figure out, is the pipeline really flowing? So it really can be a long-term investment, but there are other examples where it can pop right away. It depends on your market and the kinds of products you sell.
Yeah. I think the metrics are probably extremely important for companies who have, and for marketing, CMOs and VPs of marketing who have to show that what they're doing actually is kind of contributing to pipeline in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's the really, exciting thing about this model that like, if you like this, you'll love this, and you might need this, is because now the goal of my social media, presence, of our YouTube channel, of our, whatever else it is, it's sort of the top of funnel of our media brand. The goal of those programs isn't to create a direct conversion to a sale, right? Because that's just a fool's errand. Like that's not the way the world works. And so that's where a lot of people fail. And so again, now you're like, okay, the goal of those is to create more newsletter subscribers, report engagers, YouTube subscribers, whatever it is. That I can measure now. How much are those growing because we're promoting them in those channels? And then you say the role of those is to create high engagement and conversions into, I want to talk to your sales team, or product signups. Now I can track that as well. And so now I can very clearly see this funnel for my media brand, right? How many followers and subscribers is my reach? How much engagement are we seeing? Then how much form fills or subscriptions to this next tier of content? And then from there, how many of those people are actually coming in and requesting demos or signing up for our product? And it creates this much more clear funnel where you're intentional about, how you convert that broader audience. But again, you're not so impatient as to say, did that social follower convert to a product demo? It's like, well, no, but they converted to a newsletter subscriber.
Yeah.
And 10% of our newsletter subscribers have signed up for a product. So I've got a pretty clear line to connect the social program to our business ROI.
Do you think it's a fair statement to say, if you're not if you're not ready to commit a year to doing this, that you and actually really going all in and being prepared to adapt and change and grow and do what you need to do. If you're
Yeah.
not prepared to give that much time to it, don't even bother doing it.
I think that I'm not sure I would go that far. But I do think, because I do think that there are ways to. It's all about like how much you're looking to get out of it at the end of
Yeah.
the day, right? Like there are incremental things you can do that, again, that you should be able to like test and invest in shorter time periods. And so, but if your expectation is we need to generate a bunch of pipeline out of this, if you're not willing to give it a year, then yeah, I would probably say, yeah, don't waste your time. But if you go into it with a look, we want to create a really, we want to create a large following, right? Like that's our mission number one. Great. You can give it 3 to 6 months to see how those metrics are moving. You can invest incrementally to do that, right? And maybe you're not building out the newsletter yet. Maybe you're not building out the YouTube engine yet. Maybe you're just creating a stronger, um, report engine and a LinkedIn channel that's really dedicated to this. So you can take smaller steps, measure along the way, and take a bit of a longer tail approach to it. That can work as well. It's really a matter of like, how much do you believe in the strategy based on what you know about your audience? How much are you willing to invest in it? And, again, where do you see the potential returns on the other side? And everybody's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah. I've worked with so many clients, and not so many, but some clients that I see this opportunity for them is so clear that they've got
Yeah.
such compelling stories, and yet they can't buy into it because they have to have X number of leads coming in every month. And if they don't see that, that's all they want to put budget into for marketing. They don't want to go anywhere else. And it's always so frustrating and disappointing because I think, yes, you need to do lead gen. I know that and I understand that, but there's this other thing that you need to do that you should be doing that kind of helps you long term. That if you don't, that I don't know why they don't want to do it, but it's frustrating.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I think the big thing though that we can all be a little bit more thoughtful about to try to address that and evolve it is often it doesn't happen because we can't connect this activity to lead gen, and they say
Yeah,
we need to do more lead gen, and you're like, oh, but you also need to build brand, and they're like, yeah, but we need leads, and you're like, shoot, I can't help you out. What we need to get better at is saying, okay, you need to generate leads. Here's how you can do this brand, this content, this social strategy in a way that does connect to lead flow. And here's how you can do it, and creating a framework for that. So then they can say, oh, I see. So you're right. We can invest in this like research report, or we can invest in this new YouTube channel or whatever it is. But I have clarity around how I can tie that to a lead gen outcome. And
yeah,
that's usually what we miss because we say, well, they're disconnected. And you're saying, well, only because we haven't thought creatively about how we can connect the two, right? And
yeah,
often there isn't a one-to-one connection. But if you can say, like, if you invest in these research reports and you get 1,000 people to download them, yeah, it's great brand awareness. You're going to get great sort of like backlinks, things like that. But what if anybody who downloads that report, we could sign them up onto, I'll go back to the basic example of our monthly newsletter. And now every monthly newsletter, we're going to include information about our products. And in fact, you can put your little talk to sales button in there if you really want to. And we can start to find a way to say that audience now gets exposure to these lead gen opportunities. People are still going to push back of like, well, I need stuff this quarter. That's like a longer term play. And yeah, that's the reality, right? And if they're, sometimes there's no way to break through that wall. But I think we can start to chip away at that by providing creative ideas for how can we connect this to the lead gen engine, and let's like be intentional about it.
yeah. Tyler, this has been a really great conversation. I could probably talk about this with you forever, but I can't. Um, one of the last questions I always ask my guests and is some kind of silly, crazy question,
Uh-oh.
personal. And you kind of handed yours to me on a silver platter in your bio. So
Ooh.
I just have to ask you, like, why were you sued by the Alabama Space Camp?
All right. So for context for our listeners, yes, we had a cease and desist order from the Alabama Space Camp is one of my badges of honor as a marketer. We also received a cease and desist from the folks who own the Choose Your Own Adventure books. So there's another one. So I have 2 badges of honor as a marketer. The Alabama Space Camp was, in my early years at Vidyard, we decided to name our conference, our user conference, Space Camp. Why might you ask? That has nothing to do with video or Vidyard. Well, we took an audience first approach and we said, where do people like really want to go? Like, what would they be like? Oh my gosh, I want to go there. And we were like brainstorming and we're like, Space Camp. Like, who wouldn't want to go to Space Camp? Like, how much fun is that, right? We're like, let's call our conference Space Camp, so all of our attendees can say, I'm going to Space Camp, right? We did a whole space theme. We gave out freeze-dried snacks. It was a whole thing. We had an astronaut. It was wonderful. Afterwards, we hadn't realized that the actual term Space Camp is a registered trademark term by the Alabama Space Camp, which is the official space camp. So we were too good at posting on social media that they saw it on social media, and it all kind of went from there. So point of note: don't call your event Space Camp unless you're ready to get the lawyers out to negotiate a brand infringement settlement.
Honestly, that's kind of silly, really, when you think about it.
Well, that's what I thought, but that's not what the lawyers said. So, so be creative, but maybe not too creative sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Tyler. Thank you very much. This was a really great conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And Dixie, just so you know, yes, you can watch it on demand on LinkedIn afterwards, watch the whole event, or there will be an audio version of the podcast on all your podcast hosts probably in a few days. So thank you to our sponsor, Ingenix, who is a leading player in the field of content management and customer experience solutions. They've been offering solutions over 20 years, innovative content and digital experiences, websites, secure customer portals, knowledge bases, documentation hubs, all that great stuff. You can visit them on ingenix.com. And while you're there, sign up for the newsletter because I help write that. And we always talk about who's coming up on the podcast and all kinds of great stuff as well. So it's a really great place to kind of keep up to date on what's going on with the podcast.
Barb, the Ingenix team is practicing what we're preaching here. Most podcast sponsorships say go to our website and book a demo, but they're doing the right thing. They're saying from here, sign up for the newsletter because you're going to love it every week. Go get that Ingenix newsletter, folks.
Yeah, great. Yes, go get it. Great. Well, thank you, Tyler. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.